The M2 chip is finally here, and of the laptops that Apple put it in, I decided to actually go for a laptop that I haven't actually used a whole lot in the past. In this refresh of the lineup, we get a slightly sleeker design, some pretty cool colors, and a look at one of the laptops that many of you out there might be considering as a powerful yet really portable setup. Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here is the MacBook Air with the M2 chip, my first day with it. Alright, as this is day one content, I am basically just going to bring you my unboxing of this laptop and my first impressions on it. After all, it is just day one. Here's another good look at the edition that I got. This is the Starlight colorway. This is something that I have never gotten in other laptops. Typically when I get like MacBooks or even just PC laptops, they usually come in like darker, usually gray colors. And even though the MacBook Air might look really familiar overall, especially in its form factor, it is kind of refreshing to have a different color this time around. But with that said, let me go ahead and roll the clock back a little bit and talk about the unboxing experience with the MacBook Air. As usual, there's a pull tab, so you don't need like a knife or anything to get past the first layer, which is the plastic wrap. And then once I got the lid off, I noticed just how hefty this laptop felt. Even if this is a little bit thinner and a little bit lighter than the previous MacBook Air, it still has this weight distribution that is really noticeable. Once you get past that layer, there is a braided MagSafe cable included, which also comes in the Starlight color, and the stickers that you normally get with Apple products also come in the color that you pick. In my case, again, Starlight. But my favorite part of the unboxing was probably the power brick. Now, we can talk all day about how a lot of manufacturers, usually with smartphones, aren't including power bricks at all, but here's the MacBook Air providing a 35-watt charger that is also USB-C dual port. Honestly, my first reaction when getting into the laptop was, well, why does the Air lineup always have to get the fun colors? I mean, why does Pro have to be the opposite of colorful? I honestly think that this is just a bit more fun. In any case, the shape of the MacBook Air is one of the main things that got refreshed. As I mentioned a second ago, it reminds me of the MacBook Pro 14, and that's a laptop that I'm very familiar with because it is my daily work laptop. There are a few key differences, however. As you can see over here on the side, even though we have a headphone jack, there is nothing else on this portion. There's not a SD card slot, there's not another USB-C port, certainly no room for an HDMI port. Now, I know there are a lot of people who want even more ports on any MacBook, really. The MacBook Pro 14 and 16 kind of address those concerns, but personally, my workflow is probably going to be just fine for what is provided here. And that's because we still have these two USB-C ports here, both of which are Thunderbolt enabled. Since I use a MacBook on the daily, I do actually use the clamshell mode. On top of that, I tend to use my peripherals like mice and keyboards via Bluetooth anyway, so I don't need to plug too many things into these two ports all the time. The only thing I might need to consider is bringing some sort of SD card reader for when I'm editing stuff or working on the go. The lid opens up with one hand perfectly fine, so I know some of you out there really care about that. The keyboard feels just like what I would expect from my MacBook Pro, and it allows me to type at speeds of upwards of 100 to 115 words per minute. Perfectly fine there. I do love that keyboard. The trackpad does actually feel a little bit soft. It's the best word that I can describe it because the MacBook Pro tends to have a more clicky feel when you press all the way down. And speaking of how thin this laptop is, I definitely noticed it because when I'm using either this or the MacBook Pro, I tend to leave my thumb right around here as I am moving around with the trackpad. And I just noticed that the distance for my thumb to hit the table that is there is significantly less here than on the Pro. Small nuance, just something that I noticed. So far, the experience on the MacBook Air is incredibly familiar. There's really not much of a transition period here because there's so many things that are the same. Right down to this fingerprint reader that is over in the corner, and of course, the fact that there is a notch now up here at the top. Now, this notch area, it was a little bit of a controversial thing for people when it appeared on the MacBook Pro, but ultimately, it's something that you don't really think about after you just kind of get used to seeing it. In like 99% of situations, there's just gonna be a black bar up there because maybe you're doing stuff like watching YouTube videos, or if you go full screen on an application, it's just gonna render right below it. It's really only when you bring up your mouse and reveal the menu bar that you kind of see where that area is being utilized, and it doesn't really get in the way much at all. So I did want to make sure that in this day one, I at least experienced some of the portability factor in the MacBook Air with the M2 chip. I was reminded once again of just how thin the MacBook Air is when I replaced my MacBook Pro in the bag I usually use every day. My bag is basically made for MacBook Pros at up to 16 inches, so the 14 slots in just fine, but this laptop actually more easily slid into that slot, which was something that just got a little bit of a chuckle out of me. So for a good couple of hours, I was was just catching up on emails and browsing the internet, maybe typing up a couple of things, and I was not worried about battery life at all. That's sort of the magic of the M1 and now M2 chips that are included on the MacBook models. The laptop came with about 80% battery, and using the cafe Wi-Fi, going through my emails and typing up a couple of things for a couple of hours, I was able to get that down about 10 to 15%, which is about expected. I'm not doing anything heavy on here, even though I had YouTube playing in the background, so I wasn't expecting battery life to really surprise me in that aspect. But what about heavier workflows? Well, one thing that I have to mention is that this model of the MacBook Air actually is the step up from the base model. The base model MacBook Air with the M2 chip is $1199, and then if you go a little bit higher to the $1499 edition, you not only get twice as much storage, you also get a couple more cores in the GPU. There are some obvious reasons why I would go for that model. Well, the 2 extra cores in the GPU might be better for video editing and rendering for YouTube videos, and then having twice as much storage is good because I'm using a lot of clips with all of the cameras that I'm using at any given time. 8 gigabytes of unified memory, as they call it, is still a little bit low for me because I tend to have something playing in the background, like YouTube videos and podcasts and music, while I'm doing more intensive tasks like video editing in DaVinci Resolve. With the MacBook Pro, with the M1 chip, I was able to sort of lock up the system a bit when I was just overdoing it on how many things were running at once. One other news story that seems to be coming out from my tech peers regarding this laptop is how the 256GB storage drive is actually slower than the other ones that you can spend a little bit of extra money for, like for example the 512 right in front of me. All of those findings, along with the fact that the MacBook Air historically never comes with a fan, and this is no exception, kind of points to one main thing. Any hopes of using the MacBook Air M2 as like a powerhouse yet very portable machine might have been slightly dashed. I still think that with the M2 chip you'll be able to do a lot of great stuff with it if you're like a casual social media poster, maybe Instagram Reels and TikTok short form video content, and the occasional YouTube video without too many graphics in it. But for more people out there, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max processors are still going to be better performers for more intensive things, more graphically intensive stuff. And honestly, you may want to look into the MacBook Pros instead for those heavier workflows, because without the fan on here, the M2 might not have the speed that you're looking for. And anyway, when you're trying to get more memory or you're trying to get more storage, let's say 1 terabyte in that case, you're already going to be paying a lot of money for it. You kind of maybe should just go for the MacBook Pro anyway, because this price already starts to get up there. Again, this is more or less a first impressions video. These are just thoughts that I had while using this laptop, mainly in that cafe scenario, because in that scenario, maybe you're a student trying to write papers every day, or you're doing research, or you're just somebody that like mainly does email and web browsing and all of that. The MacBook Air, even at its base model, is probably more than enough for the majority of you out there who have that kind of workflow. Now, with all that being said, this is a day one video, and in this day one, I will make sure to at least do one video. Here's my DaVinci Resolve right here, ready to edit the video that you're watching right now. This might get a little complicated, but I'm actually going to edit this video using the MacBook Air in DaVinci Resolve, and then I'm going to compare the render times on this compared to the MacBook Pro 14 that I generally use. Oh, I'm out of tea because I drank it all while editing this video. Okay, so for the past hour, I've been editing this video up until about this point on the MacBook Air. I have about 8 minutes of a video fully put together using the MacBook Air, and then I copied all of that over to the MacBook Pro, and it's that 8 minutes of this video that I'm gonna go ahead and render on both laptops. Now, it doesn't matter if I do it at the exact same time because DaVinci Resolve on both laptops will tell me how long it took, but I do have a couple of thoughts about the editing process thus far. As I expected, 8 gigabytes of unified memory is not enough for what I do, even if I was just using DaVinci Resolve by itself. All of my footage is at least 4K, and I put that all into a multi-cam timeline. And for the first time in a long time, I had to go to the playback settings, head down here to timeline proxy resolution, and make it so that DaVinci Resolve was in real time rendering all of my 4K clips at a quarter of the native resolution so that it would be able to run more smoothly. Doing that did help a little bit, but looking at the activity monitor, I was certainly using up pretty much all of that 8 gigabytes. Compare that to my MacBook Pro, which has the M1 Pro chip. It has a fan to help keep it as cool as possible and twice as much RAM, which is useful because I have Lightroom and Photoshop typically open at the same time, so I can jump over to them and get thumbnails done quickly. On top of all of that, I tend to have YouTube playing in the background. Now, even with all of that happening, I am doing edits very smoothly at full resolution, and they are even multi-cam timelines. So yeah, there's definitely a performance disparity between this laptop and the new MacBook Air with the M2 chip. Even if the M2 is like a whole generation more than the M1 we got in the beginning, it still is not quite as good as what you can get with M1 Pro and M1 Max enabled laptops. So again, the MacBook Air is not meant for professionals, that's why Pro is a name that's used for other laptops. But since it was able to kind of handle my particular sort of intense workflow, I do think that it's still a good laptop choice for those of you who might just be focusing on social media. Maybe single cam setups, not multicam is my point, and maybe vertical video on like TikTok and Instagram Reels. But with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and hit render on both of these, and let's see how long it takes for both of these laptops to render this 8-minute video. Okay, final results. The MacBook Pro did it in 2:52, no surprise there. And the MacBook Air took about 2 minutes longer at 4:51. And so there you have it, a look at my experience on a pretty packed day one with the MacBook Air with the M2 chip. Now, I did a lot in these first 24 hours, but let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below, your thoughts and your questions, and maybe I'll come back to this laptop and give you some further thoughts if I come across anything else that might be important. Still, this might be a great everyday laptop for a lot of you out there who are in the Apple ecosystem and just want something that is easy to carry around without losing too much in terms of performance, depending on how heavy your workflow is. For more on things like the MacBook Air and beyond in the world of tech, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit that bell. Sound off by hitting the like button and by getting into the comment sections down below. With all that said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and enjoy your tea, everybody. I gotta make another cup.